now how we can do configuration of a web application. For this, actually, here we have got application settings. For the app service, we have got application settings. Now, you see a lot of settings here. First and most important thing, which version of framework you want to use. If it is 4.x or 3.x, I mean 3.5 only is there. So if you are doing a legacy .NET application, then you may want to change it to 3.5. Otherwise, if you have developed in 4.0, 4.1, 4.2, 4.5, 4.6, 4.7, for all of them you can keep it as 4.7. Relevant PHP version, which version of PHP you have used, Python, Java, they are disabled because I am not using them. Otherwise, you will have to come and explicitly enable them here. For Java, you have to also mention the major version and the container, web container version, basically the major and minor version. You have to mention them also in Java context. Do you want 64-bit platform or 32-bit platform? That also you are able to control here. You can keep it as 64-bit preferably because it's faster. WebSocket support do you want? Basically callback. Server should be able to invoke the functionality of client. WebSockets feature if you have implemented as a developer, then you may want to go for this also. Always on. Now what is this always on? See, actually what happens is when the website is running, it is in memory. So one app service can have, let's say, one app service plan, let us say, has 10 app services running. But not necessarily all 10 are getting consistent load. There are few websites which probably very occasionally only people will visit. So what Azure does is, if a website doesn't have continuous load, automatically it is going to unload the complete web app from memory. The whole web app will be unloaded, so that memory then can be used by other web apps or other app service instances. But this has a side effect. We have something called as web jobs, which are background tasks which will execute in addition to the code which we write in web app. So if your background task has to be continuous, you cannot let your web app terminate. In those kind of cases, only you may want to come and change it to on. But otherwise, it's okay to keep it as off. When the site does not have load, the site will get unloaded. But of course, there is a side effect also. After some time, if a request comes, the first request is going to be slow because the site has to be loaded again into the memory. So if you have a dedicated app service for a given app service plan, I'll prefer keeping it as always on, because we are not going to save anything by letting it unloaded when it is unused, but we might have extra load time otherwise. You want to go for integrated pipeline or classic pipeline, basically the studio or the IS feature. HTTP, which version you want to use? Nowadays people use 2.0 also, so you may want to go for 2.0. ARR affinity. Now what is this ARR affinity? Now if it is on, all your requests are going to get, suppose let us say we have multiple instances of our app service running. Let's say 3 instances are running. When the request goes from browser to server, app service internally uses something like a load balancer, which will decide to which app service instance should the request be forwarded to. And it can be randomly any one of them based on which has less load. But when you change it to on, and when you send a request, if the first instance served your first request, all subsequent instances, so all subsequent requests also will be served by the first instance only. So that's what is affinity cookie which gets created, and the same instance is going to serve all your requests. Now this is essential, especially if you have used something called HTTP sessions in your project. But if you know that your project has been developed as a stateless application, you have not used sessions, then preferably put it off, you get better performance. Auto swap, which has something to do with slotting, I'll teach that later. Then you have FTP access supported or not, and if it is FTP, do you want both FTP and FTPS or only FTPS, or you want to simply disable? For security reasons, many times we might simply disable FTP. Remote debugging support, which will come back later. And now the most important thing, application settings. Every application has in web.config certain configuration settings. In .NET, we have got them specified in the form of key value pairs. So these are predefined ones. I would want to add my custom settings here. Say I give key K1 some value V1. Now these keys, I don't want them to be same everywhere. I want in development one values, in production a different set of values. Like that, I want different values in different places. So let's say from studio V1, from studio V2. Save this. Now if I publish this, right now I just publish it as it is. Of course, I want to use these values also. So for using, I just go to view, home controller, index.html, and somewhere I put those two values, maybe here. So as I have some problem with the editor, I'm editing my files in Notepad. So here I want to use the value of K1 and K2. Say somewhere here I'll try. So p tag so K1 is equal to, now how do we get this value? We have to use system.configuration manager.app settings of K1, and likewise I'll give break here and K2. So save this. Let's test it in browser. First we'll test it locally. Actually this is there in our handout also. For some reason CSHTML files are crashing, so I'll not open that here. I'll directly use this only for execution. I press Ctrl F5. And we get the values. Perfect. So those who are not developers, you have to just see that you simply create a studio project, put this in your config file web.config, and you can copy and paste this in your ASPX page or the CSHTML file. If you are taking ASP.NET, just open views folder and in views home, and under that just open index.cshtml and just put this anywhere in the file. You can delete everything and just put this also. That is also fine. Now, there are certain things we have to understand here. These are the values I have given right now in my studio for testing purpose. But at the time of publishing, I want different values. So what we do is, in those kind of cases, as a developer, I have an option of using this web.debug.config or web.release.config. You see here two files under web.config. Now depends on what type of content you are publishing. Are you publishing a debug configuration build or you are publishing a release configuration build? If you remember, I showed you these settings. At the time of publishing, we have under settings either debug or release. So we are actually publishing release. So because we are publishing release, I go to web.release.config, and here I would have the option of giving different app settings. Remember, app settings is supposed to be directly under configuration. So what I'll do is I'll copy this from main web.config into web.release.config, and I don't want to change these, so I'll just delete them. And these two also I want to change upon some condition. Now what is that condition? You can actually copy from here. You see this transformation attributes, these are called as. So of course it's a topic related to purely developers. If you are not a developer, you can literally ignore this. I'll show you how you can change it otherwise through portal also. But right now what we are saying is, when the key matches, right now it is key, right? When the key matches in the parent configuration, and here instead of using the values from the parent configuration, use from here. That's what we are trying to say. So now when I'm going to publish, what we will notice is, after publishing, I'll go to this and I say publish. After publishing, when the site opens, it's going to show you the values which are in web.release.config and not in web.config. Very important. As a developer on your local machine, you are using these values. But at the time of publishing your app from studio, if you want different values to be published in the content which is uploaded to the server, you want the server web.config to be different, in that case you will have to actually go for web.release.config or web.config. Actually, earlier demo I have stopped this site. I have to restart it. Just say start, and once it is started, now you can come back and refresh. You will notice that the values are coming from release config. So this is for developer. But what if I am not a developer and I want to provide a different value for these application settings? Just refreshed it and it has come. So you see now release is here. The release value has come because studio has ensured that it has published. It has done transformation. Actually, you can see here somewhere on top it will have transformation. If you can read that, connection string, app settings, all these things are transformed. So the transformation is taken care by studio at the time of publishing. That's the advantage. But what if I am not a developer? I want to override this through portal. I want this to be changed through portal. So what we do is, in those kind of cases, in portal we go to AppService, we go to application settings, and here in application settings, under application settings, we have show values, and you can say add, give the same key and give the value, let's say from portal K1, and you may not give K2, you may give only one, it's your choice. Save this. So now basically what we are doing is, for this particular web application, I am saying though the value in web.config for K1 is something else, instead use this value. That's what we are saying. So for security reasons they have given this option. If you don't want your neighbor, the person sitting next to you, to see these values, you can simply hide it. And now if I come back to this and if I refresh, I should get one of these two, that is K1, getting changed. from portal. K2 is still the value which was published. So we are able to overwrite the value here. That is the point here. We are able to change the value over here. So like this, application settings can be overwritten. So to summarize it, it is like first web.config. As a developer, web.config you can overwrite in either web.release.config or web.debug.config based on what you are publishing. At the time of publishing, it is going to do transformation of the configuration file. The original configuration file is going to be transformed by taking the combination from both. Then in portal, we can overwrite. We can overwrite whatever is submitted. Now how do we overwrite? Just go to application settings and overwrite there. That's it. There are other settings also, like you can do database programming. In such kind of cases, we put in our config file connection string. So in case we want to override connection string, here we have to give that. You can say show values, add your connection string, give a value of the connection string. Maybe in some other example, when I'm doing database programming and how to host database and its corresponding application, I'll demonstrate at that point of time. But that's possible. Then we can specify what should be our default value. In case you want, you can mention one of these as default pages. And you can give priority. The one which comes first has priority. Only when none of these are found, automatically it will take ASP.NET MVC and accordingly it will behave. We can add HTTP handlers. If at all you have built as a .NET programmer, some HTTP handler, you can add that. And not only that, if you have for some reason virtual path created, that means you have some physical path, but you don't want that path to be programmed as it is. Instead, you want to have it as a different name. You can create a virtual path over here. Rather, the virtual path which is created can even be made as a application. Now you may want to probably understand this virtual directory, virtual path and so on. I would suggest you to go to my site. I have compiled one excellent video in SharePoint course here. Please watch that. It has nothing to do with Azure or anything, but this is one of the good videos which gives you very good introduction to IIS. Please look at these three. They are very, very, very useful to everybody. Even if you are not a developer or if you are a developer, in either case, how to configure IIS, all different configuration settings of IIS, what is virtual directory, what is web application, all these things are explained pretty well here. Please go through it later. So if you want your virtual directory to be called as application, put this. If not, this is fine. So these are all application settings we would like to provide at the time we deploy our application. Important thing, anything we do here overrides what is there in the configuration file, the web.config or appsettings.json if you are doing .NET Core. Remember, .NET Core configuration doesn't happen through web.config. It's a different configuration file there. So that also we are able to override through this. So that's all in this configuring app services.